Hi everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to draw a golden eagle in pastels. Now for this drawing I have used the new Canson Mi-Teintes Velvet black paper. Now this is the first time I have tried this paper and the first impression here is I'm really impressed with how dark this paper is. This is the darkest black pastel paper that I have ever used and it really is stunning. Now when I work on black paper, I usually use a slightly different layering process in that I'm allowing the black of the paper to provide some of that base tone. Now I usually pick specific reference photos with strong lighting when working on black paper because I can really enhance more of that contrast. Now one of the aspects that can be affected when working on paper that's as dark as this is the colour saturation. Now because some colours are naturally a little bit more transparent, those darker layers will show through the layers of pastel, so eventually that colour saturation will look less. However, you can see from the photo of the finished drawing in the corner that the colour saturation was fine on this dark paper. Now part of that is going to be how we layer those pastel pencils, and this is something that I'm going to focus thoroughly in this video. Now when working on the eye here, you can see that I am really focusing first of all on getting a good base foundation in first. My go-to paper is Pastelmat and I never run into any issues with layering my pastels there at all. And I always want to be working with this paper initially in exactly the same way so I can give a true comparison to how this compares to my normal Pastelmat paper. Now if you've seen the Panda tutorial that I've got available here as a side-by-side comparison of the grey velvet paper compared to the grey Pastelmat paper, you'll see there that on the Canson Velvet version I did run into issues with layering my lighter pencils over my lighter base layers. Now I will link that video in the description below if you would like to see the side-by-side comparison because the differences there were quite interesting. Now that being said, I am going to continue with working on the grey Canson Velvet paper and I'm going to tweak a couple of little techniques there to see if I can get those pencils to layer more effectively. But for this drawing here, you can see that it's coping really well. Now I am using a slightly different layering process in that I am using more of my vibrant colours first and then building up my darker values. This would be the case when working on lighter paper as well. And this isn't as a result of it being the Canson Velvet. If I was working on any darker paper, I would be using this similar layering process. Now when working on the beak, this is a prime example. Here I'm being a bit more cautious, making sure I've got my lighter layers in first. Now with any animal that we're drawing, if the paper is as dark as this, I do find this is the better approach, just to make sure there that we've got our values as light as they need to be. It's why when I worked on the eye, I started off with the Carbothello white just to block in my brightest highlight first. Those lighter values can always be darkened later on, but being able to then get them light enough when we're working with darker pastel and combined with a darker paper can make it a bit more challenging. So my biggest tip here would be to always use your lighter pencils if you are having a bit more of that brighter highlight in your reference photo. Now one thing I did notice is where I'm working on this edge of the side of the beak, I was able to get a much crisper edge compared to when I worked on the grey Canson paper. I felt there that the details that I was creating with my pencils were a little bit more grainy compared to what I'm seeing here. Now this could be potentially due to the different layering process, so what I plan to do for an upcoming project is I'm going to plan something similar like this but on the grey paper so that I can again have more of a side-by-side comparison. Now with any new medium or any new art supply, the more that we use that is going to provide more of those answers, whether or not we need to adjust the layering process or the techniques to make that paper work to its best potential. And I'm really looking forward to just seeing what this paper can do. Now as I continue here, you can see that I'm using my pastel pencils to soften and blend the layers. I'm not using any blending tools here. Now again, this is a method that I like to use when working on Pastelmat. I think the pastel pencils can provide that really unique level of softness. When using paper blending stumps, eye makeup applicators, whatever option we have there, I do sometimes feel that those applicators can actually move and shift the pastel, whereas the pastel pencils, because we're still applying some degree of pigment, that softness that's created there is quite unique. It's one technique that I love to use in all of my drawings. Now as I progress here to more of a base layer, I'm always focusing on getting a nice blended soft effect. Now I personally don't like working with a base layer that is harsh because I find that the pencil strokes we add on top will also have a harshness to it as well. So here I'm focusing on getting that base layer dark, and this is again a little bit of trial and error. Now for that top section, something I'm going to mention later on in the video is how I'm working here with mapping in my brown feathers and then adding the darks on top. Whereas the very top section just above this, I worked with my dark pencils and then I'm going to be adding my browns on top. So being able to have this side-by-side comparison on this project, I can again learn more about what this paper can do. Now there is a very big difference here with how dark the very underneath section of the neck is compared to the bit above it. You can see that I'm coming back in with my black pencil there, and the section below is just a little bit darker than the top. Now that there was my Panda drawing, and I was just comparing in the real-time tutorial, which is all linked in the description below if it's of interest. I was showing the difference in how grainy the details were on that grey paper compared to this drawing here. And again, as I say, I did use pan pastels and a different layering process for the Panda, so potentially that could be the cause. And as I said, the more I experiment with this paper, I will share more of my thoughts on that. Now the very last details there that are sitting on top of everything else, this is very similar to the whiskers. I like to leave those till the end once I know I've got that area of the drawing complete. If we add in those feathers that are wispier and sat on top too early and we're going to have to draw around them, that can just take significantly longer. It's far more fiddly and I think it can make the drawing process more stressful. Now as I start working on the side here on the neck, this is where I really wanted more of that colour saturation to be apparent. So I'm making sure to use more of my vibrant oranges and more of those rustier colours to really enhance those colour saturation on the feathers on this side. Now if I was working with a darker layer of pastel first and then add in my vibrant colours, I will end up with the layers becoming muddy. Now this of course is something that I want to prevent on any paper colour. It's not just the black, but I do want to be making sure here that I'm paying very close attention to that layering process. Now all aspects of layering and pencil technique having to achieve the good contrast here is something that I do focus thoroughly in the real-time tutorial. Because this is recorded with a voiceover while I'm drawing, I'm able to explain everything in the moment. So whether or not I felt the paper was acting a little bit differently or things that I preferred, all of this was explained at the time. Now here, one thing that I wanted to be very careful of is not to force in too many highlights. One thing that can make artwork look even more interesting and more eye-catching is having a stronger light source. So having those brighter sections on the face and the top section on the right-hand side of the neck and the top part of the wing, that there is going to create more drama in the drawing. So having this dark section underneath the throat area is something I really wanted to capture. Making sure that this was dark enough and not forcing those highlights there is going to really help with more of that shape and form. Now just like feather direction or fur direction, the placement of the highlights and shadows are not random. They do follow the underlying bone and muscular structure. So where this eagle has their head turned towards the angle of the camera, towards that top corner, this is going to help make that light source catch certain areas of the face and the body. It's going to also block out the light, which is why the throat area is much darker. So being able to replicate that in the drawing is something that is definitely going to add more realism to the piece. Now as I come in here again, you can see that I'm using a couple of different approaches just to really experiment with this a little bit more throughout the drawing. There are some very dark sections in this part and I wanted to make sure I captured that. Now one thing that I did find quite interesting here is when I'm using my black pencil, it looks like it's exactly the same as the paper colour, which I was really impressed with. I have never found a paper that is as dark as the Cretacolor black, which is what I'm using here. But when I turned the drawing on a bit more of an angle, which we will see at the end of this video, you can see that the light was catching the black pastel and it looked different to the black paper. Now I personally don't like to have those areas that almost looks like there's no pastel that's been applied, potentially like you've rushed through that area of the drawing. Now this is just my personal preference in that I like to have pastel over the entire subject, so I don't have those different, the shine or the matte comparison. So what I have done here is when I did turn the drawing on an angle, I just made sure to come back in with the black and fill in any of those other areas. This isn't something that I noticed when I was looking completely straight on at the drawing, but if potentially it was framed and on a wall and someone came at a little bit more of a side angle, it was visible. So this is why I wanted to make sure that I did come back in and correct that. Now at this stage of the drawing, this is the final tweaks where I'm just adjusting my lighting. I'm thinking, do I need to enhance my highlights or my shadows? Are there any little details that are overlapping and are going to help to add more of that depth? These last few minutes really do make the world of difference and can help take that art to the next level. Now one last thing I want to just show here is this was the brown Pastelmat paper that I actually painted black with some ink, which this tutorial, the chimpanzee, is also available for a real-time lesson, which again, all of that information is linked in the description below. But you can see here with that section of the Canson paper visible just how much darker the Canson black velvet is, even compared to when another paper is actually painted black. The paper is so dark, it really is wonderful. Now if you're looking for a really dark pastel paper, this definitely has my vote. I was really impressed with how the pencils worked, I was really happy with the colour saturation, and I was able to get those pastel pencils really light as well. The contrast here is just as good. Now here you can see how it's got that slight matte versus more of a shiny look to it when the artwork is more of an angle. And this is the one thing where I've just mentioned I wanted to come back in and correct that. Now those sections are okay to be left black. It's not that I was trying to then force in more of the brown feathers because it just wasn't needed. But I didn't want that difference with that slightly matte colour of the paper compared to the darker matte effect of the black Cretacolor pencil. So that is something that I did go back in and cover. So I do hope this video has been useful. If it was, I'd be very grateful if you could give it a like and a thumbs up. It makes a huge difference to my channel. I also upload a couple of videos to YouTube every week, so if you would like to get notified of that content, then don't forget to hit the subscribe and the bell button. If you would like to draw along to the real-time tutorial of this or any of my other step-by-step lessons, then I will link all of the information to those in the description below. If you have any art-related questions or any questions about this new velvet paper, then feel free to pop them in the comments because I'm more than happy to help if I can. I'm going to be uploading another video next week, but as always, thank you so much for watching.